when a stranger's kindness becomes home. A desperate widow collapses on a lonely frontier road with her dying breath. But when her brave daughter begs a reclusive rancher for mercy, one night in his barn becomes the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. Will compassion break through the walls of isolation, or will fear and judgment tear apart their fragile chance at redemption? Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. Now let's begin. The Wyoming sun beat down merciless and white, turning the dirt road into a ribbon of heat that shimmered like broken glass. Clara Hayes felt each step as a negotiation with her failing body. One more, just one more, then another after that. Her worn boots dragged through the dust, leaving shallow trails that the wind erased almost immediately, as if the land itself refused to remember her passage. Beside her, small fingers gripped her hand with fierce determination. Lily, barely 7 years old, walked with her chin up and her shoulders back, carrying a dignity that seemed impossible for someone so young. The child's dress, once a cheerful yellow, had faded to the color of old straw, patched at the hem with fabric that didn't quite match. A canvas bag hung from her thin shoulder, holding everything they owned in the world: 2 spare dresses, a tintype photograph in a cracked frame, a wooden horse carved by hands now cold in the ground, and a book of poetry with water-stained pages. Clara's vision blurred at the edges, the road ahead fracturing into dancing shapes. Her chest burned with each breath, a tightness that had been growing for weeks, squeezing harder with every passing day. She'd tried to hide it from Lily, tried to keep walking with steady purpose, but her body had begun to betray her in ways she could no longer mask. "Mama?" Lily's voice carried worry beneath its steadiness. "There's shade up ahead, under those trees." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The cottonwoods Lily pointed toward seemed impossibly far, wavering in the heat like a mirage. Her legs trembled, muscles burning with an exhaustion that went deeper than physical weariness. This was the exhaustion of months on the road, of sleeping in barns when they were lucky and under stars when they weren't, of watching her daughter's childhood slip away one hungry day at a time. They'd been walking since dawn, having left the last town 3 days behind them. That town, she couldn't even remember its name now, had been like all the others. Doors closing at the sight of them, lips pursing with judgment, eyes sliding away from their need. A widow with a child and no husband to vouch for her worth was worse than invisible in these frontier settlements. She was suspect, a reminder of vulnerability that comfortable people preferred not to see. Clara's foot caught on a stone she hadn't noticed, and she stumbled. Lily's hand tightened immediately, the child's small frame bracing against her weight with surprising strength. "I'm all right," Clara whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. "The trees, Mama. Just to the trees." But Clara's legs had other plans. Halfway to that promise of shade, her knees buckled. She felt herself falling, felt Lily trying desperately to hold her up, and then the hard-packed earth rose up to meet her. The impact drove the air from her lungs, sent stars exploding behind her eyes. "Mama!" Lily's voice cracked with fear, all that careful composure shattering. Small hands touched her face, her shoulders. "Mama, please, please get up." Clara tried. She pushed against the ground, managed to lift herself a few inches before her arms gave out. The world tilted sickeningly, and she tasted copper on her tongue. When had she bitten her lip? She couldn't remember. Couldn't remember much of anything except the need to keep moving, to find somewhere safe for Lily, to not give up before she'd secured her daughter's future. "Water," she managed to rasp. "In the bag." Lily fumbled with the canvas straps, pulled out their canteen. Only a few swallows remained, but she pressed it to Clara's lips with gentle insistence. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it eased the rawness in her throat. "We need help," Lily said, her voice small but determined. "There's a ranch. I can see buildings." Clara forced her eyes to focus. Through the haze of heat and pain, she could make out structures in the distance, a house, a barn, fencing that spoke of intention and permanence. Smoke rose from a chimney despite the summer heat, suggesting someone was home. Someone was living a life that included hot meals and shelter and all the ordinary comforts that had become extraordinary luxuries. "Too far," Clara breathed. Even as she said it, she hated herself for the defeat in those words. "Then I'll go." Lily stood, squaring her thin shoulders. You rest here in the shade, and I'll bring help. Lily, no! But Clara's protest died in a fit of coughing that brought tears to her eyes and spots to her vision. When she could breathe again, Lily was already walking away, her small figure growing smaller against the vast expanse of prairie and sky. Clara wanted to call her back, wanted to protect her from whatever rejection or cruelty might wait at that ranch, but she had nothing left. She could only watch as her brave, beautiful daughter walked alone toward their last hope. Caleb Reed heard the knock before his dogs did, which was unusual enough to make him pause mid-motion, the axe suspended above the wood he'd been splitting. The sound came again, tentative but persistent, not the confident rap of someone who expected welcome. He set down the axe and crossed the yard, noting how Buck and Sally, his two cattle dogs, had their ears up with interest but showed none of the aggression they'd display for a threat. Whatever waited on his porch wasn't dangerous, at least not in any way his dogs recognized. The girl on his doorstep couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, all sharp angles and serious eyes and a face too thin for childhood. Her dress had been mended so many times, it was hard to tell what the original fabric had looked like, and dust coated her from head to toe like a second skin. But she stood straight, met his gaze directly, and there was something in her bearing that reminded Caleb of soldiers he'd known, people who'd learned to carry dignity when they had nothing else left. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the fear he could see flickering in her eyes. "My mama's sick. She fell on the road yonder and I can't get her up. I'm not asking for charity or handouts, just—" She swallowed hard, and for a moment the soldier facade cracked to reveal the terrified child beneath. "Just somewhere for her to rest. Your barn would do fine. We won't be trouble, and we'll move on come morning. I promise." Caleb felt something twist in his chest, an old ache he'd thought he'd successfully buried. He knew what he should do, what the man he'd become over these last 5 years would do. Close the door. Maybe leave some food and water on the porch, but keep his distance, keep his walls intact, keep his life small and controlled and safe from the complications that caring brought. "Your mama," he heard himself say instead. "How sick?" "She's been coughing for weeks, gets tired easy. Today she couldn't walk anymore." The girl's chin trembled, but she didn't cry. "Please, sir, I know folks don't like to help strangers, especially women without menfolk, but my mama's a good person. She worked hard all her life. She don't deserve to die on a dusty road." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He saw Sarah in his mind's eye, Sarah who'd died in their bed while he was 2 days away driving cattle to market, Sarah who'd needed him, and he hadn't been there. Sarah who'd deserved so much more than she got from this hard land, and the man who'd loved her but couldn't save her. "Show me," he said, the words rough in his throat. Relief flooded the girl's face, so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. She's just down the road, under the cottonwoods. I know the place." Caleb grabbed his hat from the peg by the door, whistled for Buck to stay, and watched the house. "You got a name?" "Lily. Lily Hayes. My mama's Clara." "I'm Caleb Reed. This is my ranch." He moved past her toward the barn, his long strides eating up the ground. "Can you ride?" "Yes, sir." He saddled his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Rosie, with efficient movements born of years of practice. Lily watched with sharp attention, missing nothing. When he swung up into the saddle, he reached down and pulled her up in front of him without asking if she needed help. The child weighed almost nothing, all bone and determination. They covered the distance to the cottonwoods in minutes, Rosie's hooves throwing up small clouds of dust with each stride. Caleb saw the woman before they reached the trees, a crumpled figure in the meager shade, so still she might have been a pile of discarded clothing, except for the slight rise and fall of her breathing. He dismounted and handed the reins to Lily, approaching the woman, Clara, with the caution of a man who'd learned that getting involved meant getting hurt. But even his carefully maintained distance couldn't protect him from what he saw. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe late 20s, though hardship had etched lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of suffering beyond her years. Dark hair had escaped from a simple braid, clinging to her fever-damp forehead and neck. Her dress, like her daughter's, showed the story of their circumstances in every patch and darn and faded seam. But even unconscious, Even ravaged by illness and poverty, there was something in her face that spoke of strength, of someone who'd fought hard and long against circumstances that would have broken a lesser person. Caleb knelt beside her, pressed 2 fingers against her throat to feel for a pulse. It fluttered there, fast and weak like a trapped bird. Her skin burned with fever, and when he laid his palm against her forehead, she stirred, eyes flickering open. "Lily?" The word was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Mama." The girl scrambled down from the horse, pressed close to her mother's side. "This is Mr. Reed. He's going to help us." Those eyes, gray as a winter storm, focused on Caleb with effort. He watched her take in his face, his clothes, the horse waiting behind him, and he saw the calculation there, the desperate hope warring with learned wariness. "The barn," she managed. "Your daughter said, just the barn. We'll be gone?" "You're not going anywhere in this condition," Caleb interrupted, more roughly than he'd intended. He gentled his tone with effort. "I'm taking you to the house. You need a bed, not a pile of hay." "No." Despite her weakness, there was steel in that refusal. "No charity. We work for what we get. I can clean, cook, mend. Lily's good with animals. We'll earn our keep. You can barely breathe, let alone work." Caleb slipped his arms beneath her, lifted her as carefully as he could. She weighed almost nothing, and that worried him more than the fever. How long had they been on the road? How many meals had she skipped to make sure her daughter ate? "We'll talk about work when you're well enough to stand on your own." Clara tried to protest, but it came out as a cough that racked her whole body. Caleb felt each spasm and knew, with the instinct born of too many losses, that she was sicker than even she realized. He got her situated on Rosie, climbed up behind her with Lily in front, and turned the horse toward home. The ride back seemed longer, Clara's weight a slight warmth against his chest, her labored breathing loud in the afternoon quiet. Lily sat rigid with worry, her small hands gripping the saddle horn until her knuckles went white. "Is your mama going to die?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely audible over the horse's hooves. Caleb could have lied, could have offered empty comfort, but he'd never been good at pretty falsehoods, and this child deserved honesty. "I don't know," he said, "but she's got a better chance under a roof than she did on that road." Lily nodded, accepting this truth with a gravity that made Caleb's chest ache. No child should have to be this brave, this resigned to the possibility of profound loss. At the house, he carried Clara inside, past the kitchen where dishes still sat unwashed from his solitary breakfast, past the sitting room with its dust-covered furniture and drawn curtains, straight to the bedroom he'd kept closed for 5 years. The door opened with a creak of disuse, revealing a space frozen in time. Sarah's hairbrush still on the dresser, her shawl draped over the chair, her presence a ghost that had haunted him through seasons of deliberate isolation. He laid Clara on the bed, on sheets he'd changed religiously every month, even though no one had slept there, unable to let this last piece of Sarah fall into neglect. Lily hovered in the doorway, her eyes huge and dark in her pale face. "There's a pump in the kitchen," Caleb said, forcing himself to move, to act, to not get lost in the memories that pressed close in this room. "Get water heating on the stove. We need to bring her fever down." Lily nodded and disappeared. Caleb could hear her moving through the house with quick, purposeful steps, the sound of the pump handle working, the clatter of a pot being filled. The girl knew her way around a household, knew what needed doing without detailed instruction. He turned his attention back to Clara, began the awkward work of making her more comfortable, removing her boots, loosening the high collar of her dress, pulling a light blanket over her shivering form despite the summer heat. Her eyes opened again, focusing on him with difficulty. "Kind," she whispered. "Why?" It was a question Caleb couldn't answer, not honestly, not when he didn't fully understand himself why he was doing this, why he'd opened the door he'd kept closed, why he'd brought strangers into Sarah's room, into the heart of everything he'd protected through careful isolation. "Rest," he said instead. "Save your strength." Her eyes drifted closed, but he saw the tear that escaped, tracking down through the dust on her temple. Whether it was from relief or despair or simple exhaustion, he couldn't tell. Lily returned with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. Caleb showed her how to bathe her mother's face and arms, how to change the cloths when they grew too warm, how to watch for signs of improvement or decline. The girl absorbed everything with fierce concentration, her small hands gentle and sure. "I can sit with her," Lily said, "if you got work to do." Caleb looked at the child who was trying so hard to be adult, who'd probably been mothering her mother for longer than she should have had to, and made a decision. "You're going to eat something first," he said. "Then you can sit with her all you want. But you're no good to your mama if you collapse from hunger." He led her to the kitchen, moved through the motions of putting together a simple meal: bread, cheese, cold chicken left from his own dinner the night before. Lily ate with careful manners despite her obvious hunger, taking small bites and chewing thoroughly, never reaching for more until she'd finished what was on her plate. "How long have you been on the road?" Caleb asked, watching her eat. "Since Papa died. 3 months, maybe 4. Lily took a sip of water, her throat working. "We had a house in Missouri, but Papa had debts nobody told Mama about. When he passed, men came and took everything. Said we owed more than the house was worth. Mama tried to find work, but..." She trailed off, and Caleb could fill in the rest. A widow with a child, no references, no male relatives to vouch for her. The frontier had little patience for women in such circumstances. "Where were you headed?" "Mama heard there might be work in Montana, a town that needed a school teacher. She knows letters real good, taught me to read and write." There was pride in Lily's voice, and something else, a fierce protectiveness that made Caleb think this child would walk through fire for her mother. "That's a long walk from here." "Yes, sir. But Mama said we'd make it. She said we just had to keep putting one foot in front of the other." Lily's voice wavered. "I don't think she can do that anymore." Caleb had no answer to that, nothing that wouldn't be a lie or a false promise. So he did what he knew how to do. He offered another piece of chicken, poured more water, and let the child eat until the desperate edge left her eyes. That first day bled into evening, and evening into night. Caleb found himself moving between the bedroom where Clara fought her fever and the kitchen where he prepared simple meals he barely tasted. Lily rarely left her mother's side except when Caleb insisted, falling asleep in the chair next to the bed, with her head pillowed on her arms. Around midnight, Caleb gently lifted the sleeping child and carried her to the small spare room that had once been meant for the children he and Sarah had never had. Lily woke briefly as he laid her on the bed, her eyes flying open with alarm. "Mama, still sleeping. I'll watch her tonight. You need proper rest." "But what if..." "I'll wake you if anything changes." "I promise." Lily studied his face in the lamplight, searching for trustworthiness, for reasons to believe this stranger who'd opened his home to them. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded and let her eyes close again, asleep almost before Caleb could pull the blanket over her. Back in Sarah's room, Clara's room now, at least for tonight, Caleb settled into the chair Lily had vacated. The woman in the bed breathed harsh and uneven, her face flushed with fever even in sleep. He wrung out another cloth in cool water, laid it across her forehead, and wondered what the hell he was doing. For 5 years, he'd lived alone by choice, had kept the world at arm's length because letting people close meant risking the kind of pain he'd felt when Sarah died. He'd built a life of careful routines and deliberate solitude, and it had worked. It had kept him safe, kept him functioning, kept him from having to feel anything too deeply. And now, in the space of a few hours, that carefully constructed fortress had been breached by a desperate child and her dying mother. Not breached. He'd opened the gates himself, had carried their vulnerability right into the center of everything he'd protected. Clara stirred, muttering something incomprehensible. Caleb leaned forward, changed the cloth again, and watched the night creep toward dawn through the window he'd kept curtained for years. Whatever came next, whatever complications these strangers brought into his ordered existence, there was no going back now. He'd made his choice when he'd lifted Clara from that dusty road, and Caleb Reed, for all his faults, had never been the kind of man to abandon a commitment once made. He just hoped he'd be strong enough to survive it. The dawn came slow and gray, painting the room in shades of silver that made everything seem fragile and uncertain. Caleb's eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he'd kept his vigil through the dark hours, changing cloths when they grew warm, monitoring each ragged breath Clara took, and trying not to think about how many times he'd sat in this same chair watching someone he cared about slip away from him. Clara's fever had broken sometime around 4 in the morning. He'd felt the change in her skin temperature, seen the way her breathing eased into something more natural, and allowed himself the first full breath he'd taken since carrying her through his door. She still slept, but it was the sleep of healing now rather than the unconsciousness of crisis. Caleb stood, his joints protesting the hours of stillness, and moved quietly from the room. In the kitchen, he built up the fire in the stove and started coffee, the familiar ritual helping to anchor him in the strange new reality his life had become overnight. Through the window, he could see the barn waiting for morning chores, the chickens already pecking around the yard, the cattle dog Buck, sitting patient by the door hoping for breakfast and work. The sound of small footsteps made him turn. Lily stood in the doorway, her hair tangled from sleep, still wearing yesterday's dusty dress. Her eyes went immediately wide with fear. "Mama?" "Fever broke about 2 hours ago," Caleb said quickly, watching the terror drain from her face. "She's sleeping natural now, still weak, but better." Lily sagged against the doorframe, and Caleb saw how much strength it had taken for her to hold herself together, how close she'd been to breaking under the weight of fear and responsibility no child should carry. "You can sit with her after you eat," he said, pouring coffee for himself and milk for her. "But first, breakfast." "I should help. You should eat." Caleb set a plate in front of her, eggs scrambled with bits of ham, bread toasted on the stovetop, butter from the crock he kept in the spring house. "Your mama's going to need you strong when she wakes up properly. Can't do that on an empty stomach." Lily nodded and ate with the same careful manners as the night before, but Caleb could see her relaxing slightly, the desperate edge of survival giving way to something that might, with time, become ordinary hunger satisfied by ordinary meals. "Mr. Reed," she said between bites, "when Mama's better, we'll work. I meant what I said about earning our keep. I'm small, but I'm strong. I can muck stalls, feed animals, gather eggs. Mama can cook and clean and mend. We won't be a burden." Caleb looked at this serious child who'd probably never been allowed to simply be a child, and something shifted in his chest. "We'll talk about that when your mama's on her feet. For now, you just focus on being 7 years old." "I'm almost 8, Lily corrected with a flash of pride, then seemed to catch herself. "But I understand, sir. Thank you for your kindness." The formal words in that young voice unsettled him. He wondered what this girl had seen in her short life, what lessons she'd learned about gratitude and obligation and the price of accepting help from strangers. After breakfast, Lily disappeared into the bedroom while Caleb headed out to tend the animals. The morning chores took longer than usual, his body sluggish from the sleepless night, but the physical work felt good, grounding. Buck and Sally stayed close, sensing his distraction, occasionally nosing his hand as if to remind him they were there. He was forking hay into the horse stalls when he heard the screen door slam. Lily came running across the yard, her face bright with something that might have been joy if it hadn't been tempered with so much relief. "She's awake," the girl called. "Really awake. And she asked for water and said she was hungry." Caleb set down the pitchfork and followed Lily back to the house, stopping to wash his hands at the pump before entering. In the bedroom, Clara was propped up against the pillows, looking pale and weak, but unmistakably conscious. Her gray eyes tracked him as he entered, and he saw the same calculation he'd glimpsed yesterday. The weighing of debt and obligation, the careful measurement of risk and trust. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "Lily tells me you've been very kind. I'm grateful, more than I can say. But we can't impose on your hospitality any longer. If you could just help me to my feet." "You can barely sit up," Caleb interrupted, more sharply than he'd intended. He moderated his tone. "You've been sick for weeks from what your daughter says. Couple days of rest isn't going to fix that." "We don't have weeks to spare." Clara's hands twisted in the blanket, and he could see the effort it took for her to hold his gaze. "You've been more than generous, but I won't take advantage. We'll move on today if you can spare some water for our canteen." "Mama, no," Lily's voice cracked. "You can't even stand." "I'll manage." But Clara's face had gone gray with just the exertion of sitting up, and Caleb could see sweat beading on her forehead. He crossed the room and gently but firmly pressed her back against the pillows. "You'll manage to collapse before you reach the road, is what you'll manage. Then what? Your daughter dragging you to the next ranch, begging the next stranger for help? Clara's eyes filled with tears she clearly hated, and Caleb felt like a brute for being so blunt. But someone had to force this woman to accept the reality of her situation. I have to reach Montana, she whispered. There's a teaching position. It's our chance at a real life, a future. If I don't get there soon, they'll hire someone else. They'll hire someone else anyway if you show up half dead, Caleb said. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but you need to face facts. You're sick. Your daughter's exhausted. You've been walking for months, and it's worn you down to nothing. A few more weeks of rest, proper food, a roof over your head, that's not charity. That's common sense. A few weeks? Clara shook her head. I can't ask that of you. You don't know us. We could be what? Dangerous? Caleb almost smiled at the absurdity. Lady, you weigh about as much as a wet cat, and your daughter's too polite to swipe an extra biscuit without asking. I think I can risk it. Clara stared at him, clearly trying to find the angle, the hidden cost, the payment that would come due. Caleb understood that wariness. He'd learned it himself, had built his life around avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement. But watching this woman struggle against both her body's weakness and her pride, he found himself making an offer that surprised him as much as it clearly surprised her. Here's what we'll do, he said. You stay until you're well enough to travel proper, not just upright but actually healthy. In exchange, once you're strong enough, you help around the house, cooking, mending, whatever you're able to do. Lily can help with the lighter chores. We'll call it even. That's not even, Clara protested. Room and board for 2 people for weeks against some housework. My cooking's terrible. The house hasn't been properly cleaned in 5 years, and I've got a pile of mending that would take me months to get through, Caleb said flatly. Trust me, you'll earn your keep. But not today and not tomorrow. Today you rest. Tomorrow you rest. The day after that, we'll see. Clara opened her mouth, clearly ready to argue further, but Lily spoke up. Please, Mama, I'm so tired. The girl's voice was small and honest in a way her earlier bravery had masked. Can't we just stay? Just for a little while? The fight went out of Clara like air from a punctured bellows. She looked at her daughter, really looked, and Caleb saw the moment she recognized how close to breaking they both were. All right, she whispered. A few weeks, until I'm stronger, and then we pay our way north. Fair enough, Caleb said, though something in his chest tightened at the reminder that this was temporary, that these strangers who'd somehow breached his careful isolation would be leaving as soon as they were able. He left mother and daughter alone, retreating to the safety of outdoor work, where things made sense and emotions didn't complicate every interaction. But even as he repaired fence posts and checked cattle, part of his mind stayed in that house, aware of the presence of others in a way he hadn't been for years. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and oddly natural. Caleb would wake before dawn, do the early chores, then bring breakfast to Clara, who was still too weak to leave the bed. Lily would appear shortly after, already dressed and ready to help with whatever needed doing. The girl had an uncanny instinct for useful work. She'd start gathering eggs without being asked, would sweep the porch without prompting, would appear at exactly the right moment to help carry water or feed the dogs. Clara improved slowly. By the 3rd day, she could sit up for short periods without going gray. By the 5th, she made it to the kitchen table for breakfast, though the short walk from the bedroom left her breathless. Caleb watched her frustration with her body's weakness, saw how much it cost her pride to accept help with simple tasks, and kept his distance as much as possible. It was easier that way. Easier to maintain the boundaries he'd established, to treat this as a temporary arrangement that required nothing from him beyond basic hospitality. He spoke to them when necessary, shared meals in mostly comfortable silence, and tried not to notice how the house felt different with voices in it, with small sounds of life echoing through rooms that had been still for so long. But Lily made distance difficult. The child followed him around like a shadow whenever he'd allow it, asking questions about the ranch, the animals, the way things worked. She had a quick mind and careful hands, learning fast and remembering everything. When he showed her how to curry the horses, she absorbed every detail. When he explained about rotating pastures, she asked intelligent questions that showed she was really thinking about the answers. "Why'd you name your dog Buck?" she asked one morning, scratching the cattle dog's ears while Caleb mucked out stalls. "He came with the name. Previous owner was moving east. Couldn't take him along. That's sad. Being left behind. Caleb glanced at her, heard the weight beneath those simple words. Sometimes being left in a new place turns out all right. Buck's happy enough here. Do you think we'll be happy, wherever we end up? The question hit harder than it should have. Caleb leaned on his pitchfork, studied this girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast. I think your mama's doing everything she can to make that happen, he said carefully. And I think you're brave enough to make the best of whatever comes. Lily nodded, accepting this non-answer with the grace of someone used to uncertainty. Mr. Reed, can I ask you something? You've been asking me things all morning. Something different. She worried at her lower lip. Why are you helping us? Mama says most folks wouldn't. She says people see a widow and child and they see trouble. Caleb had been dreading this question, had known it would come eventually. The honest answer was complicated, tangled up with grief and loneliness, and the memory of his own wife dying alone while he was too far away to hold her hand. But Lily deserved honesty, even if it was incomplete. Your mama's right that lots of folks would turn you away, he said slowly. Frontier living makes people hard sometimes. They get scared of anything that might threaten their own survival. But I figure we're all struggling out here in one way or another. Sometimes the only thing that separates making it and not making it is whether someone's willing to lend a hand when it's needed. Did someone help you once? Is that why? The girl was too perceptive by half. Something like that. Lily seemed to sense he'd said all he was going to on the subject. She went back to petting Buck, and Caleb went back to his work, grateful for the reprieve. That afternoon, he returned to the house to find Clara in the kitchen. She'd managed to heat water and was washing the breakfast dishes with slow, careful movements that spoke of exhaustion held at bay through sheer will. Her hair was braided back from her face, and she'd changed into a clean dress, still faded and patched, but neat. The effort it must have taken to accomplish these simple tasks showed in the fine tremor of her hands and the pallor of her skin. You should be resting, Caleb said, more harshly than he'd intended. Clara's spine straightened. I've rested for a week. It's time I started contributing. Contributing is fine when you can stand for more than 10 minutes without swaying. I'm not swaying. You're gripping that counter like it's the only thing between you and the floor. Clara's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded him forcibly of her daughter. I won't be a burden in my own eyes, even if you're too kind to see us that way. Kindness has nothing to do with common sense. You push yourself too hard too fast, you'll end up right back in that bed for another week. Then I'll be more careful. She turned back to the dishes, dismissing him. Caleb felt irritation flare hot in his chest. This woman and her damn pride would kill her if she wasn't careful. But he recognized the futility of arguing, saw in the set of her shoulders that she'd made up her mind and no amount of logic would sway her. He left her to it, though he found excuses to pass through the kitchen more often than necessary, checking to make sure she hadn't collapsed. Each time, Clara was still upright, still working with methodical determination. By evening, she'd not only washed the dishes, but had swept the floors and started a stew with the vegetables he'd brought in from the garden. They ate in silence, the air between them tense with unspoken frustration. Lily looked from her mother to Caleb and back again, clearly sensing the conflict but uncertain how to navigate it. After dinner, Clara made it back to the bedroom under her own power, though Caleb could see it cost her. He heard her moving around in there, the sound of water being poured for washing, the creak of the bed as she settled. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, worrying at her lower lip. Is Mama making you angry? She asked quietly. No, Caleb said, then amended it to honesty. Maybe a little, but not for the reasons you're thinking. What reasons then? How did he explain to a child that watching someone push themselves past reasonable limits triggered every protective instinct he'd tried to bury? That seeing Clara force herself to work when she could barely stand reminded him of all the times he'd failed to protect the people he cared about? Your mama's stubborn, he said instead. Reminds me of someone I used to know. Your wife? Lily asked with that unnerving perceptiveness. Mama said this must have been her room, because of the lady things still in it. Caleb felt his chest tighten. Yeah, my wife Sarah. She passed about 5 years back. I'm sorry. Lily's voice carried genuine sympathy. Mama says losing someone you love is the hardest thing. Harder than being poor or hungry or scared. Your mama's a wise woman. She is. Lily moved closer, sat at the table across from him. That's why I get scared when she acts like she's stronger than she is. Because I know she's doing it for me, to make me feel safe. But it makes me more scared, seeing her pretend. The admission was offered like a gift, a sharing of burden from someone who'd carried too much alone. Caleb found himself responding with equal honesty. I know what you mean, but sometimes people need to feel useful even when they're hurting, makes them feel less helpless. Is that how you feel? Helpless? The question struck deep. Caleb looked at this child who saw too much, understood too much, and decided she'd earn truth. Sometimes, he admitted. I couldn't save my wife, couldn't even be there when she needed me most, so yeah, feeling helpless is something I know about. But you saved us, Lily said simply. Mama and me, we'd have died on that road if you hadn't helped. I gave you shelter. That's not the same as saving. Feels the same to me. Lily stood, moved toward the bedroom door, then paused. Mr. Reed? Thank you for letting Mama have her pride even when it makes you worry. I think she needs that almost as much as she needs rest. The girl disappeared before Caleb could respond, leaving him alone with observations too keen for her years, and a growing realization that these temporary guests were changing something in him he'd thought was permanently closed. The second week brought changes. Clara grew stronger, able to work for longer stretches without needing to rest. She took over the cooking entirely, and Caleb had to admit the meals improved dramatically. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, cleaning corners he'd ignored for years, mending clothes that had languished in his drawer, bringing order to spaces that had fallen into comfortable neglect. But she never asked personal questions, never tried to draw him into conversation beyond the necessities of shared living. She was polite, grateful, and careful to maintain distance even as she inhabited his space. It should have been exactly what Caleb wanted. The arrangement he'd proposed, help without entanglement, temporary and clean. Instead, he found it vaguely frustrating in ways he couldn't articulate. He'd catch himself wanting to tell her things about the hawk's nest he'd found in the north pasture, about the way the sunset looked from the ridge above the ranch, about how much better the house smelled with bread baking instead of his usual cold meals. But Clara's careful distance made such sharing feel inappropriate, like crossing boundaries she'd established for good reason. Lily had no such reservations. The girl chattered away whenever Caleb was near, filling silences with observations and questions and stories about their life before. From her, Caleb learned that Clara's husband had been a clerk, that they'd lived in a small house with a garden Clara had tended, that Lily's father had taught her to carve small animals from wood scraps. Mama never carved, Lily said one afternoon, watching Caleb repair a broken gate hinge. But she taught me letters and numbers. Papa said she was the smartest person he knew. That's why she wants to be a teacher, so she can use her smarts to help kids learn. Your papa sounds like he was a good man. He was. Lily's voice went soft. But he worried a lot. About money, about making Mama happy, about being enough. Mama said the worrying made him sick, made his heart give out. She said sometimes people can carry so much weight they just can't hold it anymore. Caleb thought about that, about the weight people carried, about how sometimes the strongest-looking people were the closest to breaking. He looked at Clara through the kitchen window, saw her kneading bread dough with methodical focus, and wondered what weights she carried beyond the obvious ones. That evening, he came in from the barn to find Clara standing in the sitting room, Sarah's shawl in her hands. She'd been dusting. The furniture gleamed in a way it hadn't in years, but now she held the woolen wrap like it might bite. I'm sorry, she said quickly when she noticed him. I wasn't snooping. I was just cleaning, and this was draped over the chair. It's fine. Caleb's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. That was my wife's. Clara carefully refolded the shawl, placed it back exactly where it had been. She had good taste. The weave is beautiful. She made it herself, spent a whole winter on it. He didn't know why he was telling her this, but the words kept coming. Said she wanted something that would keep her warm when I was out working. She finished it 2 weeks before she died. I'm sorry for your loss, Clara's voice held genuine sympathy. Lily told me it's been 5 years. The grief must still be fresh. It dulls, Caleb said. Doesn't go away, but it dulls. You learn to live around it. Yes. Clara met his eyes, and in that moment, Caleb saw reflected there a grief that matched his own. You learn to keep moving because stopping means drowning. You learn to get up each day even when you're not sure why. You learn that living and wanting to live aren't always the same thing. The honesty of it hit Caleb like a physical blow. This woman understood, not in an abstract, sympathetic way, but with the bone-deep knowledge of someone who'd walked the same dark roads. Your husband, he said. You loved him. I did. Clara's hands twisted together. Not the wild, passionate love from storybooks, but steady and real. He was kind. He tried hard. He deserved better than dying young and leaving debts that stole everything from his family. Not his fault he died. No. But dying's never just about the person who goes. It's about everyone left behind trying to figure out how to keep living. Clara seemed to catch herself, as if realizing she'd said too much. I should finish the cleaning before supper. She moved to leave, but Caleb stopped her with a question he hadn't planned to ask. Why teaching? Why Montana? Clara paused, her back to him. Because I'm good with letters and numbers. Because children deserve to learn regardless of whether they're rich or poor. Because it's honest work that would give Lily stability and me purpose. She turned, met his eyes. And because I need to believe that all of this hardship, is leading somewhere. That we're not just surviving, but building towards something better. The raw hope in her voice made Caleb's chest ache. He recognized that desperate need to believe suffering had meaning, that the struggle would eventually yield something worth the cost. You'll make it, he said. To Montana, to teaching. You're too stubborn to do otherwise. Clara smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to something that made Caleb's breath catch. Stubborn. Is that the kind way of saying foolishly persistent? It's the honest way of saying you don't quit. Neither do you, Mr. Reed. This ranch, keeping it running alone, that takes its own kind of persistence. Caleb, he said before he could stop himself. After 2 weeks of sharing a house, you can call me Caleb. Caleb. Clara tested the name, nodded. And you should call me Clara. Mrs. Hayes makes me feel like I should be teaching school already. It was a small thing, this exchange of names, but it felt significant, like crossing an invisible line they'd both been carefully respecting. The air between them shifted, became charged with possibility. Neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge. Lily's voice calling about supper broke the moment, and they both moved toward the kitchen as if grateful for the interruption. But Caleb found himself watching Clara through dinner, noticing small things, the way she cut Lily's meat without being asked, the careful way she rationed her own portions to ensure her daughter had enough, the quiet competence in every movement. This was dangerous, he realized. This noticing, this awareness, this growing appreciation for the woman who'd invaded his carefully controlled solitude. Because in a few weeks, maybe less, Clara would be strong enough to travel. She'd take Lily and head north to Montana, to that teaching position and the new life she'd been fighting so hard to reach. And Caleb would be alone again, back in the silence he'd chosen, surrounded by memories and regret and the ghosts of people who'd left him behind. The smart thing would be to rebuild his walls now, to reestablish distance before it hurt too much to watch them go. But as Lily chattered about the kittens she'd found in the barn and Clara smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, Caleb found he didn't want to be smart. Not yet. For just a little while longer, he wanted to pretend that this temporary arrangement might last, that his house might stay full of voices and warmth and life, even knowing the cost he'd pay when the pretending had to end. The third week brought the inevitable collision with the outside world. Caleb had known it was coming. A man couldn't shelter two strangers on his ranch without the town eventually noticing, but he'd allowed himself to pretend otherwise, to exist in the bubble of their temporary arrangement as if it could last indefinitely. The pretense shattered on a Tuesday morning when he rode into town for supplies. The general store fell silent when he entered, conversations cutting off mid-sentence in that way that told him he'd been the subject under discussion. Martha Henshaw, the storekeeper's wife, pursed her lips so tight they nearly disappeared. "Mr. Reed," she said with cold civility, "haven't seen you in a few weeks. Been busy with the ranch. Caleb handed over his list, kept his voice neutral. So we've heard. Martha's eyes glittered with malicious curiosity. Heard you've been real busy, taking in a widow woman and her child, from what folks say. The other customers had stopped even pretending to shop, all attention focused on Caleb and the drama unfolding. He recognized the Johnsons, the Pratts, old Samuel Miller who ran the livery, and Agnes Winters whose tongue was sharper than her late husband's razor and twice as cutting. I gave shelter to some travelers who needed help, Caleb said evenly. Nothing more worth discussing than that. Nothing more? Agnes moved closer, her voice pitched to Carrie. A widow woman living under your roof unchaperoned for weeks? Mr. Reed, surely you understand how that appears to decent folk. Caleb felt heat crawl up his neck, but he kept his expression flat. How it appears and what it is are two different things. Mrs. Hayes was ill. She's recovering. When she's well enough to travel, she'll continue north. End of story. Oh, I'm sure that's the story you're telling, Martha said, her tone suggesting she believed no such thing. But a man living alone taking in a pretty widow, well, people talk, and they wonder what kind of woman would accept such an arrangement, what kind of mother would expose her child to such impropriety. The implication made Caleb's hands curl into fists. You're suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Martha interrupted, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. Just observing that respectable women don't live with men they're not married to. And respectable men don't offer such living arrangements unless they're expecting something in return. The unfairness of it crashed over Caleb like a wave. Clara had done nothing but work hard and maintain perfect propriety. She'd been grateful, distant, careful to never overstep or presume. And now these people who'd never met her, who knew nothing about her struggles or her character, were dragging her name through the mud because she'd committed the terrible crime of accepting help when she desperately needed it. Mrs. Hayes is a good woman trying to reach Montana where she has a teaching position waiting, Caleb said, his voice hard. She was sick. I gave her a place to recover. There's nothing improper about basic human decency. Human decency? Agnes laughed, the sound sharp and mean. Is that what they're calling it now, Mr. Reed? You may think we're simple folk, but we weren't born yesterday. A woman like that, desperate and alone, of course she'd use what charm she has to secure a roof over her head. And a lonely widower like yourself, well, it's no wonder you fell for it. You don't know what you're talking about. Caleb's control was slipping, anger burning hot in his chest. Don't I? Agnes stepped closer, her eyes narrowed. I know her type. Come from nothing, got nothing, willing to do anything to change that. How long before she's got you convinced to make the arrangement permanent? How long before you're married to damaged goods and that child calls you Papa? The phrase damaged goods snapped something in Caleb. He thought of Clara's careful pride, her determination to earn her keep, the way she'd worked herself to exhaustion rather than accept charity. He thought of Lily's brave face asking for shelter in a barn, of the tears Clara had tried to hide, of the strength it must have taken to keep walking when everything in her wanted to give up. You will not speak about them that way, he said, his voice quiet and deadly. You don't know them. You don't know what they've been through or how hard they've fought. You're just a bunch of small-minded gossips who'd rather tear down someone struggling than offer a hand up. The store went completely silent. Martha's face flushed red with indignation. How dare you speak to us? How dare you judge them? Caleb cut her off. Every one of you sitting comfortable in your homes, looking down on a woman whose only crime is being widowed and poor. Well, I'll tell you what's improper. It's condemning someone without knowing a damn thing about them. It's spreading lies because you've got nothing better to do. It's calling yourselves Christian folk while showing less charity than a stone. He grabbed his supply list back from Martha's shocked hands. Keep your goods. I'll order from the catalog. Caleb walked out of the store into the bright morning sun, his heart pounding with anger and something that felt dangerously close to fear, because he knew how these things worked in small frontier towns. Once the gossip started, it spread like wildfire, and there was no putting it out. Clara's reputation, whatever remained of it, would be destroyed. And worse, Lily would suffer for it, would carry the stain of her mother's supposed impropriety. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever. Caleb's mind churning through the confrontation and its likely consequences. He should never have defended them so publicly, should have let the gossip slide past without acknowledgement. But the thought of staying silent while those vicious women tore apart Clara's character, he couldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. When he reached the house, Clara was hanging laundry on the line he'd rigged up near the kitchen garden. The sight of her there, so naturally domestic, doing ordinary tasks in the sunshine, made his chest tighten. Lily sat nearby, playing with the barn kittens and talking to them in the serious voice she used when she thought no one was listening. Clara looked up as he approached, her smile fading when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" Caleb dismounted, tried to figure out how to explain what had happened. "Town knows you're here." "I assumed they would eventually." Clara's hand stilled on the sheet she'd been pinning. "That's not what's bothering you, though. What did they say?" There was no point in sugarcoating it. Clara deserved to know what she was facing. "They're calling your character into question, saying a widow living under my roof unchaperoned is improper, suggesting that you're—" He couldn't quite make himself repeat the ugly implications. Clara's face went pale, then flushed with shame and anger. "I see." "I defended you," Caleb said quickly, "maybe too forcefully, but I couldn't stand there and let them—" "You shouldn't have." Clara's voice was tight. "You should have agreed with them, put distance between us. Now they'll think you're compromised too, that I've somehow ensnared you." She pressed her hands to her face. "This is exactly what I was afraid of, exactly why I didn't want to stay even when I was too weak to walk, because I knew how it would look, knew what people would say." "Who cares what they say?" Caleb moved closer, frustrated by her resignation. "You haven't done anything wrong." "That doesn't matter." Clara lowered her hands, and he could see tears threatening in her eyes. In their minds, "I'm already guilty. A desperate widow, probably willing to do anything for security. And you're a lonely man who took advantage. The truth doesn't matter when the lie fits people's expectations better." "Then we'll prove them wrong." "How?" Clara laughed bitterly. "By me leaving immediately and confirming I was just using you for temporary shelter? Or by staying and confirming everything they suspect? There's no winning this, Caleb. There's only damage control." Lily had stopped playing with the kittens, was watching them with wide, frightened eyes. Caleb saw the moment Clara noticed her daughter's attention, saw her straighten her spine and force calm into her voice. "We'll leave tomorrow," Clara said quietly. "I'm strong enough now. We've imposed on your kindness long enough." "You're not fully recovered," Caleb protested. "I'm recovered enough. We've walked further in worse condition." Clara's jaw set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. "I won't destroy your reputation along with mine. You've been nothing but kind to us, and this is how I repay you? By making you the subject of town gossip? No. We'll go." "And where will you go?" "You don't have money for stage fare. Montana is still weeks of walking from here." "We'll manage. We always do." But Clara's voice wavered, betraying the fear beneath the determination. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to insist they stay, but he could see the fear in Lily's face and the shame in Clara's, and he knew that his defense of them in town had somehow made everything worse. He thought he was protecting them, but all he'd done was confirm the town's suspicions and made their position more precarious. "At least wait a few days," he said finally. "Let me put together proper supplies for the journey. Food, a decent pack, maybe some money to help with—" "No money." Clara's refusal was absolute. "I won't take money. Supplies for the road, fine. We'll accept that as payment for the work I've done here. But not money. I won't give them that to hold over us." The conversation ended there, both of them frustrated and hurt, and unable to find a path forward that didn't involve someone sacrificing something precious. Caleb returned to his work, throwing himself into physical labor to avoid thinking about how empty the house would feel once they were gone. Clara finished the laundry with mechanical precision, her face carefully blank. Only Lily seemed unable to hide her emotions. The girl moved through the rest of the day like a small ghost, her usual chatter replaced by heavy silence. She picked at her dinner, barely eating despite Clara's gentle encouragement. When bedtime came, Caleb heard her crying softly in her room, the sound muffled but audible through the thin walls. He found himself standing outside her door, uncertain whether he had the right to offer comfort. Before he could decide, Clara slipped past him and into the room. He heard her soft voice, soothing words he couldn't quite make out, and Lily's tears gradually quieting. When Clara emerged, she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She found Caleb still standing in the hallway, neither of them quite meeting the other's eyes. "She doesn't want to leave," Clara said quietly. "She's been happy here. For the first time since her father died, she's felt safe and settled. And now I'm uprooting her again because I was foolish enough to think we could accept kindness without consequences." "You're not foolish. You were desperate and sick and trying to survive. And look where that's brought us." Clara leaned against the wall, all her careful strength crumbling. "I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing toward Montana, toward that teaching position. I thought if I could just reach it, everything would be okay. But I'm starting to wonder if I'm chasing a dream that doesn't exist. If maybe there's no place for people like us, people who don't fit into neat categories of respectable or proper." The defeat in her voice hurt more than Caleb expected. This was Clara who never quit, who walked until she collapsed, who worked through exhaustion, who fought for every scrap of dignity. Hearing her question whether the fight was worth it felt like watching something precious break. "There's a place," he said. "Maybe not in that town's general store, maybe not with those particular people, but somewhere. You're too strong to give up now." "Am I?" Clara looked at him, really looked, and he saw the depth of her weariness. "I'm so tired, Caleb. Tired of fighting, tired of being strong, tired of pretending I have answers when all I have is hope that's getting thinner every day." Without thinking, Caleb reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond the necessary contact of helping her when she was sick, and the connection felt electric, dangerous, profound. "Then rest," he said. "Stop fighting for one night. Let yourself be tired." Clara's fingers tightened on his, and for a moment he thought she might cry, but she just nodded, squeezed his hand once more, and withdrew. "Thank you. For everything. For giving us shelter. For defending us. For being kind when you had every reason not to be. I hope someday I can repay that." She disappeared into her room before Caleb could respond, leaving him standing in the hallway with his hand still warm from her touch and his chest tight with emotions he didn't want to name. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Caleb was working in the barn when he heard a horse approaching. He stepped out to see Reverend Thomas, the circuit preacher who passed through town once a month, riding up on his elderly bay gelding. "Mr. Reed," the Reverend called, his weathered face kind beneath his broad-brimmed hat. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Reverend." Caleb wiped his hands on his work pants, wary but curious. "What brings you out this way?" Reverend Thomas dismounted with the stiffness of a man who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. "Heard some concerning talk in town yesterday. Thought I'd ride out and see the situation for myself rather than relying on gossip." Of course he had. News traveled fast in small communities, and the Reverend made it his business to know what was happening with his scattered flock. Caleb braced for judgment, for another lecture about propriety and reputation. But the Reverend surprised him. "Heard you gave shelter to a widow and her child. Heard they were in pretty bad shape when you found them. That true?" "Yes, sir. They were on the road to Montana when the woman, Clara, collapsed from illness. Her daughter asked for shelter in my barn. I brought them to the house instead." "I see." Reverend Thomas studied him with eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be easily shocked. "And the town's saying that's improper." "Among other things." Caleb kept his voice neutral. "Mind if I meet this widow? Form my own opinion?" Caleb hesitated, then nodded. Clara deserved the chance to defend herself, and the Reverend was at least willing to listen rather than condemn sight unseen. They walked to the house together, where Clara was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table while Lily practiced her letters on a slate. Both looked up as the men entered, and Caleb saw Clara's face pale when she recognized the preacher's caller. But she straightened her shoulders, wiped the flour from her hands, and met the Reverend's gaze directly. "Ma'am," Reverend Thomas said, removing his hat. "I'm Reverend Thomas. Mind if I have a word?" "Of course." Clara's voice was steady despite the fear Caleb could see flickering in her eyes. "Lily, why don't you go gather eggs for me?" Lily looked like she wanted to protest, but something in her mother's face made her nod and slip outside. Once she was gone, Clara turned back to the Reverend with the same dignity she'd shown from the beginning. "I know why you're here," she said before he could speak. "The town's talking. They think I'm taking advantage of Mr. Reed's kindness, that I'm—" She faltered, then pushed on. "That I'm being improper." "Are you?" the Reverend asked gently. "No." Clara's voice rang with conviction. "I was desperate and sick and scared my daughter would watch me die on some dusty road. Mr. Reed offered shelter when I had nowhere else to turn. I've worked to earn my keep, maintained perfect propriety, and planned to leave as soon as I was well enough to travel. If that's improper, then I don't understand the word." Reverend Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you, Mrs. Hayes. I've been ministering to frontier folk for 20 years, and I've learned to tell the difference between someone working an angle and someone genuinely in need. You strike me as the latter." Clara's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. But believing you and changing what the town thinks are two different things," the Reverend continued. "Perception matters out here, fair or not. And the perception is that you're living with a man you're not married to. That's going to follow you, make life harder than it already is." "I know." Clara's voice went small. "That's why we're leaving. I won't destroy Mr. Reed's reputation along with my own." "Leaving solves one problem, but creates others," Reverend Thomas said thoughtfully. "You're not fully recovered. The road to Montana is long and hard. Winter's coming in a few months. Seems to me you're trading one kind of hardship for another." "What choice do I have?" Clara's frustration broke through her composure. "Stay and confirm everything they're saying. Leave and struggle? There's no good option here, Reverend. Just degrees of bad." The Reverend looked between Clara and Caleb, his expression thoughtful. "There might be a third option, one that would satisfy propriety and give you both what you need." Caleb felt his stomach drop, suddenly knowing what the Reverend was about to suggest. "You could marry," Reverend Thomas said simply. "Make the arrangement official and legal. Would solve the gossip problem right quick." Clara's face went white. "Marry? Reverend, we barely know each other. Mr. Reed has been kind, but that's not a basis for marriage. I won't trap him into—" "You're not trapping anyone if it's a choice freely made," the Reverend interrupted. "I'm not suggesting a love match. I'm suggesting a practical arrangement. Mr. Reed needs help running this ranch. You need security and a home for your daughter. Seems to me those needs might complement each other." Caleb found his voice finally. "Reverend, think about it before you refuse," Reverend Thomas said firmly. "I'm not trying to force anyone's hand, but I'm trying to point out that sometimes the practical solution is the right one, even if it's not romantic. Marriage out here isn't always about love. Sometimes it's about survival and partnership and building something together." He put his hat back on, preparing to leave. "I'll be in town for 2 more days if you decide you want to discuss this further. But either way, Mrs. Hayes, you've got my blessing to continue your journey north. I'll make sure folks know I've visited and found nothing improper in your conduct. Won't silence all the gossip, but it might take some of the sting out." After the Reverend left, Clara and Caleb stood in the kitchen, the air thick with everything unsaid. The bread dough sat forgotten on the table, and outside they could hear Lily talking to the chickens as she collected eggs. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally. I didn't mean for things to get so complicated. It's not your fault." Caleb moved to the window, stared out at his land. "The Reverend's right about one thing, though. You leaving doesn't solve everything. You're still not strong enough for that journey, and He stopped, unsure how to finish that thought. "You what?" Clara's voice was soft. Caleb turned to face her, made himself say the truth. "I don't want you to go. Not yet. Maybe not at all." The admission hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Clara's eyes widened, and he could see her processing what he'd said, what it might mean. "Caleb, we can't," she struggled for words. "This isn't real. This situation, this connection we've built, it's born from desperation and proximity. That's not enough to base a life on." "Isn't it?" Caleb moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Clara, I've lived alone for 5 years, convinced myself I wanted it that way. Then you and Lily show up, and suddenly my house feels like a home again. I wake up looking forward to breakfast conversation. I find myself wanting to share things, small things like how the garden's growing, or how the cattle are doing. That's not desperation. He paused, made himself say it. That's caring. You care because we're here, Clara said, but her voice shook. Once we're gone, you'll go back to your life. You'll realize this was just temporary loneliness. And what about you? Caleb challenged. What about what you feel? Clara's face crumpled slightly before she caught herself. What I feel doesn't matter. I can't afford to feel anything except determination to reach Montana and build a future for my daughter. I can't afford to hope for more than that. Why not? Because hope hurts. The words burst out of Clara like they'd been held too long under pressure. Because every time I've hoped for something good, life has taken it away. My husband, my home, my security, all gone. I can't hope that this might work, that you might actually want us permanently, because when it falls apart, I won't survive it. I'm barely surviving as it is. The raw pain in her voice broke something open in Caleb. He closed the distance between them, took her face gently between his hands, made her look at him. I'm not asking you to hope, he said quietly. I'm asking you to consider a partnership, practical, honest, real. You work the house, I work the land. Lily gets stability and education. We build something together without pretending it's a fairy tale. No false promises, no unrealistic expectations, just two people making the best of circumstances and maybe, if we're lucky, finding something good in the process. Clara's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair to you. You deserve more than a marriage of convenience to a woman who can't even promise to love you. I had love once, Caleb said. It was beautiful, and it broke me when I lost it. I'm not asking for that again. I'm asking for partnership, for companionship, for someone who understands that life is hard and doesn't expect me to be anything other than what I am. And what if we fail? What if we make each other miserable? Then at least we tried. At least Lily had a chance at a real childhood instead of more roads and more uncertainty. At least you had rest instead of endless struggle. Caleb's thumbs brushed away the tears on her cheeks. Clara, I can't promise this will be easy or perfect, but I can promise I'll treat you with respect, give Lily a home, and never make you feel like you owe me anything beyond honest effort. That's more than the road's offering you. Clara closed her eyes, and Caleb could almost see her weighing everything, the risks and rewards, the practicalities and possibilities, the fear and the fragile hope she was trying so hard not to feel. When she opened her eyes, they were clear despite the tears. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it honestly. No pretending, no forcing feelings that aren't there. We're partners, not lovers. We're building security, not romance. Agreed. And Lily comes first, always. If this arrangement ever hurts her, we end it, no matter what. I wouldn't have it any other way. Clara took a shaky breath, then nodded. Then ask me, properly. Caleb felt his heart hammer against his ribs. This wasn't how he'd imagined proposing, wasn't the romantic gesture men were supposed to make. But Clara was right. Honesty mattered more than romance, and what he was offering was real, even if it wasn't conventionally perfect. He took both her hands in his, held them steady. Clara Hayes, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in building a life here, in making this ranch a home, in raising your daughter and facing whatever comes together instead of alone? Yes, Clara whispered, then stronger. Yes. I'll marry you, Caleb Reed. And just like that, everything changed. The silence that followed Clara's acceptance felt both weighted and fragile, like the moment between lightning and thunder when the world holds its breath. Caleb still held her hands, and neither of them seemed ready to let go, as if releasing this physical connection might break the spell and force them to confront the enormity of what they'd just agreed to. The kitchen door banged open, and Lily burst in carrying a basket of eggs, her face flushed from the sun and bright with the unselfconscious joy of a child who'd found something wonderful. Mama, one of the hens laid 2 eggs right while I was watching. I saw the whole thing and… She stopped abruptly, taking in the scene before her. What's wrong? Why are you crying? Clara pulled her hands free from Caleb's, quickly wiping at her cheeks. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Everything's… She glanced at Caleb, and he saw the question in her eyes. How much do we tell her? How do we explain this decision that will change her entire world? Everything's different now, Caleb finished for her, crouching down to Lily's level. Your mama and I have been talking. We've decided that instead of you two moving on to Montana, you might stay here, permanently. Lily's eyes went huge. Permanently? Like live here forever? If that's all right with you, Clara said softly. Mr. Reed and I, Caleb and I, we're going to get married. Make this official and proper. You'd have a real home, your own room, stability. The basket of eggs hit the floor. Lily didn't seem to notice, too busy staring between her mother and Caleb with an expression that cycled rapidly through shock, confusion, hope, and something that looked like carefully guarded disbelief. Married? She whispered. But you don't... you're not... She struggled to find words for the complexity of adult relationships. You like each other, but you're not in love. I can tell. The child's perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised Caleb by now, but it still caught him off guard. Clara knelt beside him, took her daughter's hands with the same gentleness Caleb had shown her moments before. You're right, Clara said with the honesty she'd promised Caleb. We're not in love. Not the way you read about in storybooks, but we respect each other. We work well together, and Caleb is offering us something precious. Safety, security, a chance for you to grow up in one place instead of always moving. But what about Montana, the teaching job? Montana will still be there if we need it, Clara said, though Caleb could hear the letting go in her voice, the release of a dream she'd carried for so long. But this is a good opportunity, Lily, a chance for something stable. Lily looked at Caleb, her young face serious and searching. Do you want us? Really want us? Or are you just being kind because Mama's desperate? The bluntness of the question hit Caleb square in the chest. He met the girl's eyes, saw Sarah looking back at him in the way Lily demanded honesty, even when it hurt, and knew he owed her nothing less than the complete truth. I want you, he said simply. Both of you. The house has been too quiet for too long. You make it feel like a home again. Your mama's right that we're not in love, but that doesn't mean I don't care about what happens to you. I do. More than I expected to. Lily studied him for a long moment, then looked back at her mother. And you want this, Mama? Really? You're not just doing it because you think it's the only choice? Clara pulled her daughter close, held her tight. I want you to be happy and safe, more than I want anything else in this world. If staying here gives you that, then yes, I want this. I want it very much. Then I want it too. Lily's voice came muffled against Clara's shoulder. I like it here. I like the animals and the ranch, and the way Caleb teaches me things without making me feel stupid. I like having a bed that's mine and meals every day and not being scared all the time. I want to stay. Something in Caleb's chest cracked open, and he found himself blinking against unexpected moisture in his eyes. He reached out, awkward but genuine, and included both of them in an embrace that felt simultaneously foreign and exactly right. They stayed like that for a moment, three people choosing each other not out of passion or romance, but out of need and respect, and the fragile hope that sometimes practical decisions could grow into something more. When they finally pulled apart, Lily was smiling despite her tears. Clara looked lighter than Caleb had ever seen her, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Anticipation for a future that held possibility instead of just more of the same. We should tell the Reverend before he leaves town, Clara said, practical even in this emotional moment. Make the arrangements official. I'll write in this afternoon, Caleb agreed. See when he can perform the ceremony. Should we? Clara hesitated. Should we have any kind of celebration? Invite people? The question hung awkward between them. This wasn't a conventional marriage. There would be no joyful gathering of friends and family, no community celebration of young love. Just two practical people making a practical choice, and inviting others to witness it would only highlight how unconventional their arrangement was. Just us, Lily said decisively, and the Reverend. That's all we need. Both adults looked at her, and she lifted her chin with that stubborn dignity that was pure Clara. People in town already think bad things about Mama. Having a big wedding won't change their minds, but doing it quiet and private, that's for us, not for them. The wisdom in those words coming from someone so young made Caleb's heart ache, but Clara nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her daughter's observation. Just us then, she agreed. Simple, and honest. Caleb rode to town that afternoon, his mind churning with the speed at which his carefully ordered life had been upended. Less than a month ago, he'd been alone, content in his isolation, convinced he wanted nothing more than his ranch and his routines and his carefully maintained distance from anything that might hurt him. Now he was riding to arrange a marriage to a woman he barely knew, preparing to become a husband again and a father figure to a child who'd already lost one father. The practical part of his mind cataloged everything that could go wrong. They might discover incompatibilities that made living together unbearable. Clara might resent the sacrifice of her teaching dreams. Lily might struggle with accepting him as any kind of parental authority. The town might never accept their unconventional arrangement, making every trip for supplies an exercise in enduring judgment. But beneath the practical concerns ran something else, a quiet excitement he hadn't felt in years. The house would have laughter again. Meals would be shared instead of solitary. There would be reasons to plan for seasons beyond the next one. Reasons to think about improvements and expansions and futures that included more than just himself. He found Reverend Thomas at the boarding house, settling in for supper. The older man looked up as Caleb entered, and something in Caleb's face made him smile. "I take it you've made a decision," the Reverend said. "We'd like to marry," Caleb confirmed. "Soon, if possible. Just a simple ceremony with no fuss." "Marriage is never simple, son, even when the ceremony is." But Reverend Thomas stood, extended his hand. "I'm glad, though. Saw the way you looked at that woman and her child. Saw the way they looked at you. Might not be a love match now, but I've seen worse foundations for a marriage. Respect and mutual need can grow into something good if you tend it right." They arranged the ceremony for 2 days hence, giving Clara time to prepare whatever she felt needed preparing, though Caleb suspected she'd protest any elaborate arrangements. As he turned to leave, the Reverend stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "One piece of advice, if you'll take it," Reverend Thomas said. "Don't let the marriage stay just practical. Make time for the small kindnesses, the unexpected gestures, the moments of genuine connection. Practical partnerships work, but they work better when they're seasoned with affection, even if that affection isn't romantic love." Caleb nodded, filed the advice away to think about later, and headed back to the ranch. He stopped at the general store despite his earlier confrontation, needing supplies he couldn't do without and unwilling to let Martha Henshaw's judgment dictate his behavior. The store was blessedly empty when he entered, just Martha behind the counter, looking sour as old milk. "Came back, did you?" she said, her voice dripping false sweetness. "Suppose you need provisions even when you're living in sin." "Won't be living in sin much longer," Caleb said flatly. "Reverend Thomas is marrying us day after tomorrow, so you can take your gossip and—" He stopped himself, pulled back the anger. "Just fill the order, Mrs. Henshaw." Her eyes widened, clearly caught off guard. "You're actually marrying her, that desperate widow?" "I'm marrying Clara Hayes, a good woman who deserves better than the treatment this town's given her," Caleb corrected. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your opinions to yourself from now on. She'll be my wife, which makes any insult to her an insult to me." Martha's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish, but for once she seemed at a loss for words. She filled his order in tight-lipped silence, and Caleb paid, took his supplies, and left feeling like he'd won some small but significant victory. Back at the ranch, he found Clara in the kitchen working on dinner while Lily set the table with unusual care, her face serious with concentration. They both looked up as he entered, and he saw the question in their eyes. "Day after tomorrow," he said. "Reverend Thomas will come out here to perform the ceremony. Says it doesn't need to be in a church to be binding." Clara's hand stilled on the pot she'd been stirring. "So soon? No point in waiting, unless you need more time?" Caleb studied her face, trying to read what she needed from him. "No," Clara said slowly. "No, you're right. Waiting won't make it easier or harder. It just delays the inevitable." The word inevitable sat heavy in the air, carrying weight neither of them wanted to examine too closely. But Lily broke the tension with practical concerns. "What will you wear, Mama? You don't have a nice dress." Clara looked down at her faded, much-mended, everyday dress, and something like pain crossed her face. "This will have to do. It's clean and neat, and that's what matters." But Caleb found himself thinking about Sarah's things, still packed away in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Sarah had been taller than Clara, but not by much, and she'd had a dress, a beautiful blue one she'd worn to church, that had made her eyes look like summer sky. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared into the bedroom before he could second-guess himself. The trunk opened with a creak of disuse, releasing the faint scent of lavender sachets Sarah had packed with her clothes. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he pushed aside everyday dresses and shawls until he found what he was looking for. The blue dress lay folded beneath everything else, preserved and perfect, waiting for an occasion that would never come for its original owner. He carried it back to the kitchen, saw Clara's eyes widen as she recognized what he held. "Caleb, no, I can't. That was your wife's." "I know whose it was," Caleb said quietly, "and I think she'd be glad to see it worn for something good instead of just staying packed away forever. It might need some alteration, but Lily says you're handy with a needle." Clara reached out, touched the fabric with reverent fingers. "It's beautiful." "Try it on at least. See if it fits." Clara disappeared into the bedroom, and Caleb heard the rustle of fabric, the small sounds of someone trying to be careful with something precious. When she emerged, his breath caught. The dress fit well enough, just a bit long in the hem and loose in the shoulders, but the blue brought out the gray of her eyes and made her skin glow. She looked beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the dress and everything to do with the cautious hope transforming her face. "Oh, Mama," Lily breathed, "you look like a princess." "I look like a woman wearing a dress too fine for her," Clara said, but she was smiling, and Caleb could see her fighting the urge to twirl like a girl. "But if you're sure, Caleb, if you really think it's all right." "I'm sure." And he was. Seeing Clara in Sarah's dress didn't hurt the way he'd expected. Instead, it felt right, like passing something forward instead of letting it die with the past. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation that was somehow both ordinary and weighted with significance. Clara washed and mended the blue dress until it fit perfectly. Lily picked wildflowers from the meadow and arranged them in jars around the house. Caleb found himself cleaning corners he'd ignored for years, wanting the place to look its best even though no guests would see it. They didn't talk much about the ceremony itself or what would come after. Instead, they focused on the practical details of combining their lives. Clara moved her few belongings into the bedroom while Caleb quietly removed the last of Sarah's personal items to the trunk, each piece handled with respect, but without the paralyzing grief that had kept him from touching anything for 5 years. Lily explored the question of what to call Caleb with the seriousness it deserved. "I can't call you Papa," she said bluntly over breakfast the morning before the wedding. "That was my father's name, and it wouldn't be right." "I wouldn't expect you to," Caleb assured her. "Mr. Reed is fine." "But you'll be married to Mama. That makes you family." Lily chewed her lip, thinking, "Could I call you Caleb? Not Pa or Papa, just Caleb." The simple request, offered with such careful hope, made Caleb's throat tight. "I'd like that." Lily beamed, and just like that, the awkwardness dissolved. She started using his name immediately, trying it out in different contexts, and Caleb found he liked hearing it in her young voice, liked being called instead of titled. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that made everything seem possible. Caleb dressed in his Sunday best, clothes that had hung unused in the wardrobe for years, and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing. This was practical, he reminded himself, sensible, a solution to multiple problems that would benefit everyone involved. But when Clara emerged from the bedroom in the blue dress, with her dark hair carefully arranged and her face nervous but determined, practical fell away, and Caleb was struck by the reality of what they were about to do. They were binding their lives together, creating a family from nothing but need and hope and fragile trust. That wasn't practical. That was terrifying and brave, and possibly the most important decision he'd made since buying this ranch. Reverend Thomas arrived precisely at noon, riding his elderly bay and carrying a worn Bible. He took in the scene, Caleb in his church clothes, Clara in her borrowed blue dress, Lily clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, and smiled with genuine warmth. "Ready to make this official?" he asked. "As ready as we'll ever be," Caleb said, and Clara nodded beside him. They gathered in the sitting room, the one Caleb had finally opened the curtains in after years of keeping it shut. Afternoon light streamed through the windows, making dust motes dance in golden shafts. Lily stood beside her mother, holding the flowers with both hands and looking solemn as a judge. Reverend Thomas opened his Bible, but before he began, he looked at each of them in turn. Marriage is a serious commitment, whether it's based on passionate love or practical partnership. You're promising to be faithful to each other, to support each other through hardship, to build a life together. That's not easy, even under the best circumstances. But I believe you both understand what you're taking on, and I believe you have the strength to make it work. He turned to Caleb. Caleb Reed, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to provide for her, protect her, respect her, and treat her with kindness for as long as you both shall live? Caleb looked at Clara, saw the fear and hope warring in her eyes, and felt his own answer rise up from somewhere deeper than logic. I do. Clara Hayes, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to stand beside him, support him, respect him, and build a home and life together for as long as you both shall live? Clara's voice was steady despite the tears shining in her eyes. I do. Then by the power vested in me, and before this witness, Reverend Thomas smiled at Lily, I pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was brief and chaste, just a gentle press of lips that sealed the promise more than expressed passion. But when they pulled apart, Clara's cheeks were flushed, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest, some door opening that he thought was permanently closed. Congratulations, Reverend Thomas said warmly. May your marriage be blessed with patience, understanding, and growing affection. Lily launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around as much of them as she could reach. We're a family now, she said, her voice muffled against their joined hands. A real family. And standing there in the sunlit sitting room with his new wife and her daughter pressed close, Caleb felt the truth of those words settle into his bones. They were a family. Maybe not conventional, maybe built from necessity rather than romance, but real nonetheless. After Reverend Thomas left, they stood awkwardly in the kitchen, none of them quite sure how to proceed. The ceremony was done. They were married. Now what? I made a cake, Clara said finally. Nothing fancy, but I thought we should mark the occasion somehow. The cake was simple yellow with honey glaze, but it tasted like celebration. They ate it at the kitchen table, making small talk about the weather and the ranch and anything but the elephant in the room, the sleeping arrangements that would need to be addressed once the sun went down. Lily, either oblivious to the tension or choosing to ignore it, chattered about how she wanted to learn to ride horses properly, not just sit on them while someone led them around. Caleb found himself promising to teach her, making plans for tomorrow and next week and next month, as if they had all the time in the world. When evening came, Lily went to bed without prompting, clearly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Clara tucked her in, and Caleb heard their murmured conversation through the thin walls. Reassurances and love and promises that everything would be all right. When Clara finally emerged, she found Caleb building up the fire, even though the night wasn't particularly cold. He needed something to do with his hands, some task to occupy him while they navigated this first awkward night as husband and wife. Lily's asleep, Clara said unnecessarily. Good. Caleb set down the poker, turned to face her. Clara, about the sleeping arrangements. I'll take the spare room, she said quickly. I know we're married, but we agreed this was practical, not romantic. I won't assume. I was going to say you should keep the main bedroom, Caleb interrupted. It's bigger, has the better mattress. I'll take the spare room. That's not right. You've been sleeping in that room. With my wife's ghost, Caleb said bluntly. Maybe it's time I let that go. Fresh start and all. Clara studied his face in the firelight. Are you sure? I don't want to push you out of your own room. It's your room now, too. You're my wife. You belong in the main bedroom. The words felt strange in his mouth, but also right. Besides, the spare room's closer to Lily. Makes sense for me to be there in case she needs something in the night. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but Clara accepted it with a small nod. Thank you for being kind about this. I know it's awkward. Everything about this is awkward, Caleb agreed. But we'll figure it out. We've got time. Do we, though? Clara moved closer to the fire, hugging her arms around herself. What if the town doesn't accept this? What if being married to me ruins your reputation completely? Then let it be ruined. I've spent 5 years living for other people's approval, trying to be the respectable widower who doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. I'm tired of it, Clara. I'd rather be married to you and dealing with gossip than alone and supposedly respectable. The fierce declaration surprised them both. Clara looked at him with something like wonder. You really mean that? I do. Caleb moved closer, took her hands the way he had when proposing. I know this started as a practical solution, but that doesn't make it less real. You're my wife now. I take that seriously, even if we're not in love. I'll defend you. I'll stand beside you. I'll be the husband you deserve, practical or otherwise. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I'll try to be a good wife, even if I'm not entirely sure what that means in our situation. I think it means we figure it out together, make our own rules instead of following everyone else's. I'd like that. Clara squeezed his hands, then released them. I should probably get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day of learning how to be married. Clara? Caleb stopped her before she could leave. Thank you for taking a chance on this. On me. Thank you for giving us a home. She hesitated, then rose on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Good night, husband. Good night, wife. Caleb stood in the quiet kitchen long after Clara had gone to bed, listening to the settling sounds of his house, their house now, and trying to process everything that had changed in the span of a few weeks. He'd gone from solitary rancher to husband and father figure, from isolated to intimately connected to two people who needed him in ways that were both terrifying and gratifying. Sleep, when it finally came in the narrow bed of the spare room, was surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in 5 years, Caleb dreamed of the future instead of the past. And in those dreams, he wasn't alone. The morning after the wedding brought new rhythms to establish and old patterns to break. Caleb woke early from habit, dressed quietly so as not to wake the house, and stepped into a kitchen where Clara was already building up the fire in the stove. She looked up as he entered, her hair still loose around her shoulders, and for a moment they both froze, caught in the strangeness of this new intimacy. Morning, Caleb said finally. Good morning. Clara turned back to the stove. I thought I'd make a proper breakfast. Eggs, ham, biscuits, if that's all right. It's more than all right. You don't have to ask permission, Clara. This is your kitchen now, too. Hard to remember sometimes that this is real, that I'm allowed to just... She gestured vaguely at the space around them. Be here. Make decisions. Act like I belong. Caleb poured himself coffee from the pot she'd already started, leaned against the counter. You do belong. Ring on your finger proves it. Clara glanced down at the simple gold band Reverend Thomas had provided, one from a set he kept for exactly these kinds of sudden marriages. It looked foreign on her hand, a bright circle of promise among the work-roughened skin and careful scars of someone who'd fought hard for survival. Still feels like a dream, she admitted. A good dream, but one I'm afraid to trust completely. Then trust it a little bit at a time, Caleb suggested. Start with breakfast. Trust that you're allowed to cook in your own kitchen. Clara smiled, and the tension eased slightly. They worked together in companionable silence, Caleb setting the table while Clara cooked, moving around each other with the careful awareness of people still learning each other's rhythms. When Lily appeared, sleep-rumpled and yawning, she took in the domestic scene and grinned. You're really married, she said, as if confirming a fact she'd half believed was impossible. I can tell because Caleb's using the good plates. Seemed appropriate, Caleb said, ruffling her hair as she passed. First breakfast as a family should use the good plates. They ate together, the conversation flowing easier than it had the night before. Lily asked about learning to ride, and Caleb promised to start lessons that afternoon. Clara mentioned some mending that needed doing and some preserves she thought she could make from the last of the garden vegetables. Ordinary talk of ordinary things, but weighted with the significance of planning a shared future instead of just surviving day to day. After breakfast, Caleb headed out to start the morning chores. He was mucking out the horse stalls when Clara appeared in the barn doorway, hesitant but determined. I thought I might help, she offered. If you'll show me what needs doing. You don't have to. I want to understand how the ranch works, what keeps it running. I'm part of this now, not just a guest helping with house tasks. Clara stepped further into the barn, looking around with genuine interest. Teach me. So Caleb taught her. He showed her how to feed the horses, how to check their hooves for stones, how to measure out grain and hay. He introduced her to each animal by name and personality, explained the rhythms of ranch work and the seasonal cycles they'd need to prepare for. Clara listened with fierce attention, asked intelligent questions, and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Lily joined them after a while, and the three of them worked together, feeding chickens, checking fence lines, cleaning water troughs. It was simple work, repetitive and physical, but there was something deeply satisfying about doing it together, about teaching and learning and building the kind of knowledge that would sustain them through seasons to come. That afternoon, true to his word, Caleb started teaching Lily to ride properly. He saddled Rosie, the gentlest of his horses, and showed Lily how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to sit balanced and confident. Clara watched from the fence, her expression torn between pride and fear as her daughter cantered around the corral. "She's doing well," Caleb called to Clara. "Natural seat." "She looks so small up there," Clara called back. "She's braver than she looks." Caleb brought Rosie to a halt beside Lily, adjusted her grip on the reins. "That's it. Gentle but firm. Show the horse you know what you're doing, and she'll trust you." The lesson lasted an hour, and by the end Lily was flushed with triumph and accomplishment. She dismounted with Caleb's help, immediately running to her mother. "Did you see, Mama? I was cantering, really cantering." "I saw, sweetheart. You were wonderful." Clara hugged her daughter close, but her eyes found Caleb's over Lily's head. "Thank you," she mouthed. As the sun set on their first full day as a married family, they gathered again around the kitchen table for supper. The food was simple but plentiful, the conversation easy, the silences comfortable rather than awkward. And when the day finally ended and they went their separate ways to their separate beds, Caleb found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, this practical arrangement might grow into something that resembled the home he'd thought he'd lost forever. It wouldn't be the same as what he'd had with Sarah. It couldn't be. But it might be something just as valuable, a partnership built on honesty, respect, and the courage to keep trying even when the outcome was uncertain. And for now, for tonight, that was enough. The weeks that followed their wedding unfolded like the gradual changing of seasons, not dramatic shifts, but subtle transformations that accumulated into something fundamentally different from what had been before. Caleb found himself attuned to small changes in ways he hadn't anticipated. The sound of Clara humming while she worked in the kitchen. The way Lily's laughter echoed through the barn when she discovered new kittens. The smell of bread baking that meant someone was waiting for him when he came in from the fields. But the town's judgment hung over them like a persistent storm cloud, never quite breaking but never fully clearing either. The first real test came 3 weeks into their marriage when Clara insisted on accompanying Caleb to town for supplies. He'd been making the trips alone, protecting her from the stares and whispers, but she'd finally put her foot down over breakfast. "I'm your wife now," she'd said, her chin set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. "That means standing beside you, not hiding behind you. If we're going to make this work, I can't spend the rest of my life avoiding town because some people have small minds and smaller hearts." Lily had looked between them, her young face anxious. "Will people be mean to Mama?" "Probably," Caleb had answered honestly. "But your Mama's tougher than she looks, and she's right. We can't let gossip dictate how we live." So Clara had changed into her best dress, not the blue wedding dress, but a serviceable gray one she'd mended until it looked almost new, and climbed up beside Caleb on the wagon seat with her spine straight and her face composed. Lily sat between them, one small hand gripping her mother's arm and the other clutching the edge of Caleb's coat. The town felt different to Caleb now, the familiar streets and buildings transformed by the awareness of hostile eyes watching their approach. He drove the wagon straight to the general store, set the brake with deliberate calm, and helped Clara down with the courtesy due a wife. Lily jumped down on her own, staying close to her mother's side. The store went silent when they entered, conversations dying mid-sentence. Martha Henshaw stood behind the counter, her expression a mixture of surprise and barely concealed disdain. Agnes Winters sat in her usual chair by the stove, surrounded by her circle of similarly minded women whose primary entertainment seemed to be dissecting their neighbors' lives. Mr. Reed, Martha said with cold formality. And Mrs. Reed, I suppose I should say now. You should, Caleb agreed evenly. My wife needs some fabric for a dress. Lily's growing out of her clothes faster than we can keep up. The emphasis on wife was deliberate, claiming Clara publicly and daring anyone to challenge it. Clara moved to examine the bolts of fabric, her movements graceful despite the tension radiating through her shoulders. Lily stayed pressed against her side, her eyes huge and wary. Heard you had a quiet wedding, Agnes called from her chair, her voice carrying pointed curiosity. No guests, no celebration, almost like it wasn't worth celebrating. Clara's hand stilled on the fabric she'd been examining, and Caleb saw her jaw tighten. But before he could respond, she turned to face Agnes with calm dignity. We celebrated with the people who mattered, Clara said quietly. My daughter, my husband, and our minister. Everything a true marriage needs. True marriage, Agnes laughed, the sound sharp and mean. That's one way to describe a desperate arrangement between a man too lonely to see straight and a woman willing to do anything for security. Mrs. Winters, Caleb's voice cut through the store like a blade. You'll mind your tongue when speaking about my wife, or you'll find your own husband no longer welcome to do business with me. I buy cattle from him twice a year, or have you forgotten? The threat landed. Agnes's face went mottled red, torn between outrage and the practical concern of losing profitable business. Before she could formulate a response, Reverend Thomas stepped into the store, his presence commanding immediate attention. Good morning, he said pleasantly, his eyes taking in the tense scene with understanding. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, how wonderful to see you. I was just telling folks at the boarding house what a lovely ceremony you had. Simple and sincere, exactly as a marriage should be. The Reverend's public endorsement shifted something in the room's atmosphere. He was respected, his judgment trusted, and his clear approval of the marriage made it harder for others to openly condemn it. Thank you, Reverend, Clara said, her voice warm with gratitude. It was perfect for us. I'm glad to hear it. Reverend Thomas moved to examine some tools on display, but his presence remained a buffer against further hostility. Mrs. Reed, I heard you were once a school teacher, or hoping to be one. We've been looking for someone to teach the children hereabouts. Current teacher's moving back east to care for her aging mother. Position's yours if you want it. The offer landed like a thunderclap. Clara's face went pale, then flushed with emotion. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, the Reverend suggested gently. Town could use someone with education and patience to mind the children. Pays modest but steady. Would start after harvest season ends. Caleb watched Clara struggle with the offer, saw the longing war with practical concern. Teaching had been her dream, the goal she'd been walking toward when illness had felled her. Now it was being handed to her, but accepting might mean facing these hostile women and their children day after day. I'll consider it, Clara said finally. Thank you, Reverend, truly. The remainder of the shopping trip passed in relative peace, Agnes and her circle subdued by the Reverend's presence and tacit approval. But as they loaded supplies into the wagon, Caleb could feel Clara trembling slightly, the cost of maintaining her composure showing through now that the immediate confrontation had passed. You did well, he said quietly, helping her onto the wagon seat. I wanted to scream at them, Clara admitted, her voice shaking. Wanted to tell them exactly what I thought of their judgment and their cruelty. But that would only confirm what they already believe, that I'm not respectable, not worthy. You're worth 10 of them, Caleb said fiercely, and anyone with eyes can see it. Clara turned to look at him, really look, and something in her expression shifted. You really believe that? I do. Caleb held her gaze, letting her see the truth of it. I married you for practical reasons, Clara, but I respect you. I admire you. And I'll be damned if I let anyone make you feel small for surviving the best way you knew how. Lily, squeezed between them, piped up with childish wisdom. Mama always says people who are mean to others are just scared inside. Maybe those ladies are scared of something. Maybe they are, Clara agreed, pulling her daughter close. But their fear doesn't get to become our shame. The ride home was quieter, each of them processing the confrontation in their own way. But that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Clara brought up the teaching offer. I want to do it, she said, joining Caleb on the porch, where he'd gone to watch the sunset. Teaching, I mean. But I'm worried about what it might cost us. If I'm working in town every day, facing those women and their children, then you'll face them, Caleb interrupted, with your head high and your conscience clear. Clara, you've wanted this. Don't let their small-mindedness steal your dream. But what about the ranch, the housework? I can't do both. We'll figure it out. Hire someone to help with the heavy cleaning if we need to. I'm not helpless in the kitchen, even if my cooking's terrible. And Lily's old enough to help more. Caleb turned to face her fully. This marriage was supposed to give you stability and opportunity, not trap you into being just a housewife if that's not what you want. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You'd really be all right with it? With me working? I'd be proud of it. Of you. Caleb reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying in its intimacy. You're smart and patient and good with children. This town's lucky to have you, even if some of them are too stubborn to see it yet. The tears spilled over, and Clara didn't try to stop them. I don't deserve you. Pretty sure I'm the one who doesn't deserve you, Caleb countered. You took a chance on a grumpy widower with a rundown ranch and a heart he'd locked away for 5 years. That takes either courage or foolishness, and I'm betting on courage. Clara laughed through her tears, the sound surprised and genuine. Maybe a bit of both. They sat together on the porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and Caleb found himself taking her hand without conscious thought, their fingers interlacing with an ease that suggested this was becoming habit. Not romance, he told himself, just companionship, just the comfort of not being alone. But the warmth spreading through his chest suggested it might be more complicated than that. Clara accepted the teaching position the next time Reverend Thomas visited, and the news spread through town with the speed of wildfire. Opinions were predictably divided. Some saw it as an opportunity for a qualified teacher to educate their children. Others viewed it as rewarding impropriety and setting a bad example. But the school board, persuaded by the Reverend and desperate for any qualified candidate, voted to hire her. The weeks before school started were filled with preparation. Clara reviewed textbooks, planned lessons, and worried herself into sleepless nights over whether she was truly ready. Caleb watched her throw herself into the work with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, and felt something in his chest continue to shift and open. He found himself doing small things to support her, building a desk in the corner of the sitting room where she could work on lesson plans, buying her a new slate and chalk from the catalog, listening patiently while she practiced teaching methods on him and Lily. These weren't grand gestures, but Clara seemed to treasure them more than any elaborate gift. You're being very kind, she said one evening, watching him hang a lamp above her new desk to give her better light for reading. Partners support each other, Caleb said, testing the lamp's stability. That's what we agreed to. I know, but Clara hesitated, then continued. It feels like more than partnership sometimes. Like maybe we're becoming friends. Caleb climbed down from the chair he'd been standing on, considered her words. Would that be so terrible? Being friends as well as partners? No, Clara said softly. No, it would be wonderful. I just don't want to assume, don't want to push for more than you're comfortable giving. Clara. Caleb moved closer, took her hands in his now familiar gesture. I'm comfortable with whatever this is becoming. I don't know what to call it exactly. It's not the passionate love I had with Sarah, but it's real, and it matters, and I value it. Value you. Can that be enough for now? It's more than enough, Clara whispered. It's everything I hoped for, and more than I thought I deserved. The first day of school arrived with autumn crispness in the air, and Clara's nerves strung tight as piano wire. Caleb drove her to town in the wagon, Lily bouncing with excitement beside her mother. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden building with large windows and a bell tower that had seen better days. Children were already gathering, parents dropping them off with varying degrees of enthusiasm or reluctance. Caleb recognized some of the families, the Johnsons, the Pratts, others whose names he knew from occasional business dealings. He saw the calculating looks some of the mothers gave Clara, the way they positioned themselves between their children and the new teacher as if morality might be contagious. But he also saw Reverend Thomas standing near the schoolhouse door, his presence a stamp of approval. And he saw a few families, newer settlers, people who hadn't yet absorbed the town's prejudices, greeting Clara with genuine warmth. You'll do fine, Caleb said, helping Clara down from the wagon. Just remember, you know more than they do, and you care more than most. That's what matters. Clara squeezed his hand, then squared her shoulders and walked toward the schoolhouse with Lily at her side. Caleb watched her ring the bell to call the children inside, watched her transform from his nervous wife into Mrs. Reed the teacher, confident and capable and born for this work. He drove away feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, pride in someone else's accomplishment, investment in someone else's success. The ranch work that day felt lighter somehow, knowing Clara was in town doing what she loved, building something that mattered. When he picked her up that afternoon, Clara was exhausted but glowing. Lily chattered nonstop about the lessons, about the other children, about how Mama had been so smart and patient even when Jimmy Pratt had been difficult. "How was it really?" Caleb asked once Lily had finally run out of words. "Hard," Clara admitted. Some of the children were openly hostile, clearly repeating things they'd heard at home. But others were wonderful, eager to learn, respectful, genuinely interested. And by the end of the day, even the difficult ones had settled somewhat. "I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think I might actually be good at this." "I know you are," Caleb said with certainty. "Give it time. They'll see what I see. Someone who cares about teaching them, not someone to judge." The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Clara left early for school, returned tired but satisfied. Caleb managed the ranch with Lily's increasingly capable help after school hours. Evenings became precious time together, sharing meals, discussing the day, slowly building the kind of intimacy that came from shared experiences rather than romantic passion. But the breakthrough came unexpectedly one cold October evening when Lily fell ill. She'd seemed fine at breakfast, but by afternoon she was flushed with fever and complaining of a sore throat. Clara, terrified of losing another person she loved, sat by her daughter's bedside with barely controlled panic. "It's probably just a cold," Caleb said, feeling Lily's forehead with the back of his hand. "Children get them all the time." "Or it could be something worse," Clara said, her voice tight with fear. "My husband started with just a sore throat. 3 days later, he was dead." The raw terror in her voice made Caleb understand this wasn't just about Lily's current illness, but about every loss Clara had endured, every person who'd been taken from her when she least expected it. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, put his arm around her shoulders, and felt her lean into him like someone who'd been holding herself upright too long. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said quietly. "Better safe than sorry." The doctor, when he arrived, confirmed it was indeed just a cold, prescribed rest and fluids and time. But the damage to Clara's composure was done. After the doctor left and Lily had fallen into restless sleep, Clara stood in the kitchen trying to make tea with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the kettle. Caleb took it from her gently, set it aside, and pulled her into an embrace without asking permission. Clara resisted for exactly one heartbeat before collapsing against him, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for hours, maybe for months, maybe for years. "I can't lose her," she gasped against his chest. "I can't. She's all I have left of anything good in this world. If something happened to her—" "Nothing's going to happen to her," Caleb said firmly, holding Clara tight and letting her cry. "She's strong and healthy, and she's got 2 people who love her watching over her. She'll be fine." "You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that. People die, Caleb. Good people, people who don't deserve it, people you love. They just die and leave you alone, and you survive it," Caleb finished gently, "like you've survived everything else. But Clara, you don't have to survive alone anymore. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, we face it together." Clara pulled back enough to look at him, her face blotchy and wet with tears. "Why are you so kind to me? I'm a mess. I'm scared and broken, and I don't have anything to offer you except yourself," Caleb interrupted, "which is more than enough. Clara, you think you're broken, but I see someone who's been beaten down by life and keeps getting back up. Someone who walked until she collapsed rather than give up on her daughter's future. Someone brave enough to accept help even when it terrified her. That's not broken. That's the strongest person I've ever met." "I don't feel strong," Clara whispered. "Strength isn't about not being scared," Caleb said. thinking of his own 5 years of running from grief. It's about being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. You've been doing that since the day I met you. Hell, probably since long before that. Clara's tears slowed, her breathing evening out. She stayed in Caleb's arms, and he held her. And somewhere in that quiet kitchen with sick child sleeping in the next room, something fundamental shifted between them. The walls they'd both carefully maintained, the distance that made their practical arrangement safe, crumbled like paper in rain. "Caleb," Clara said eventually, her voice muffled against his shirt, "I think I might be falling in love with you." The word should have terrified him, should have sent him retreating behind his defenses, protecting himself from the vulnerability that loving someone brought. But instead, Caleb felt something like relief wash over him. "Good," he said simply, "because I'm pretty sure I'm already there." Clara pulled back to stare at him, shock and hope warring in her expression. "But we agreed. We said this was practical, not romantic. We weren't supposed to a lot of things," Caleb agreed. "Weren't supposed to care this much. Weren't supposed to become a real family. Weren't supposed to fall in love. But here we are anyway, and I'm not sorry about it. Are you?" "No," Clara breathed. "No, I'm not sorry. I'm terrified, but I'm not sorry." Caleb kissed her then, properly this time. Not the chaste press of lips from their wedding, but a real kiss that spoke of everything they'd been holding back, everything they'd been afraid to acknowledge. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, and Clara was crying again, but these were different tears. "I didn't think I could feel this way again," she said. "After losing my husband, I thought that part of me was closed forever, that the best I could hope for was security and companionship. And now? Now I have security and companionship and love, all wrapped up in one impossibly kind, stubborn, wonderful man who picked me up off a dusty road and gave me back my life." "Pretty sure you gave me back mine too," Caleb said. "This house was just a building until you filled it with living. I was just going through motions until you gave me reasons to actually live again." They stood together in the kitchen, holding each other and marveling at how their practical arrangement had transformed into something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. From the bedroom, they heard Lily cough, and they moved together to check on her, partners in worry and care. Lily's fever broke the next day, her resilient young body throwing off the illness with the speed of healthy childhood. When she woke up properly, clear-eyed and hungry, she found both Clara and Caleb sitting beside her bed, their hands intertwined. "You're holding hands," she observed with satisfaction. "Does this mean you're doing the love part now too? Not just the married part?" Clara laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "Yes, sweetheart. We're doing the love part now too." "Good," Lily said decisively. "I was wondering how long it would take you two to figure it out. I knew since the wedding that you liked each other more than you were saying." "Did you now?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I'm 7, not stupid," Lily informed him with the confidence of childhood. "I see things, like how Mama smiles different when you're around, and how you always make sure she has the best pieces of meat at dinner, and how you both try to pretend you're not watching each other, but you totally are." Both adults had the grace to look sheepish. "When did you get so observant?" Clara asked. "I've always been observant. You just stopped noticing because you were too busy being in love and pretending you weren't." Lily sat up, looking between them seriously. "So does this mean we're a real family now, like for always?" "We've been a real family since the wedding," Caleb said firmly. "But yeah, kid, for always." Lily beamed and launched herself at both of them, wrapping her thin arms around as much of them as she could reach. "I'm glad. I was so scared when Mama fell on the road. I thought we were going to die out there, both of us. And then you helped, and you kept helping, and now we're here, and Mama's happy and teaching, and you're not lonely anymore, and I have a home, and everything turned out better than I even hoped." The simple recitation of their journey from desperation to belonging made Clara's eyes fill with tears again. But these were happy tears, the kind that came from gratitude and relief, and the overwhelming awareness of how close they'd come to missing this, how easily their story could have ended differently. The months that followed were not perfect. Clara still faced occasional hostility in town, though her excellence as a teacher gradually won over even the most skeptical parents. The ranch had hard days when weather or livestock or equipment failures tested their patience and resources. And there were moments when grief would ambush them both, Clara missing her first husband, Caleb remembering Sarah, and they'd have to navigate the complex emotions of honoring their pasts while building their future. But they navigated it together, with honesty and patience and growing affection that deepened with each shared challenge overcome. Christmas came, and they celebrated modestly but joyfully, Caleb carving a beautiful doll for Lily and Clara, presenting him with a new shirt she'd sewn in secret. Spring brought new calves and garden planting, and Lily's 8th birthday marked with a cake so elaborate it took Clara 2 days to make. By the time summer rolled around again, a full year since that scorching day when a desperate child had knocked on his door, Caleb stood on his porch watching Clara and Lily work in the garden together, their laughter carrying across the yard, and felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Contentment. Not just the absence of pain, but the presence of joy. Clara looked up, caught him watching, and smiled with the kind of warmth that made his chest tight. She said something to Lily, then walked across the yard to join him on the porch, settling easily into his arms when he reached for her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "About how sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances," Caleb said honestly. "How we almost missed this because we were both so convinced we didn't deserve another chance at happiness." "We're lucky," Clara agreed. "Lucky you had a kind heart underneath all that grumpiness. Lucky I was stubborn enough to keep living when it would have been easier to give up. Lucky Lily was brave enough to ask a stranger for help." "Not luck," Caleb corrected gently. "Courage. Yours, mine, and that amazing daughter of yours. We chose this, Clara. Chose to trust, chose to try, chose to build something good from broken pieces." "Our daughter," Clara corrected with a smile. "She's our daughter now. She made me promise to tell you that she wants to officially take your last name. Says she's tired of being Lily Hayes when she's really Lily Reed in her heart." The casual mention hit Caleb harder than he'd expected. He'd been careful not to push, not to try to replace Lily's father, but hearing that she wanted to claim him as her own meant more than he could articulate. "If that's what she wants," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "It is. She loves you, Caleb. Not because you're replacing her father, but because you're exactly who you are. Patient and kind and steady and safe. You gave us both a home, but more than that, you gave us belonging." Caleb pulled Clara closer, pressed a kiss to her hair, and looked out over his land. Their land now, all of them building this life together. The barn that had once seemed like exile from society now stood as the place where their story began, a symbol of courage rather than desperation. The house that had been a tomb for his grief was now filled with laughter and warmth and the ordinary chaos of family life. "You know what the best part is?" he said after a while. "What's that?" "We get to keep doing this, day after day, year after year, building our life, watching Lily grow up, facing whatever comes together. This isn't the end of our story, Clara. It's just the beginning." "I like that," Clara said softly. "Beginning again. Starting over. Building something new from what we thought was ending." Lily called from the garden, asking for help with something, and they moved together to join her, 3 people who'd each been broken in different ways, but had somehow fit together into something whole. The town's gossip had faded to background noise, irrelevant in the face of their genuine partnership and growing love. The road to Montana that had once seemed like Clara's only hope was forgotten in favor of the home they'd built right here. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Caleb and Clara sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. It had become their ritual, this quiet time to decompress from the day and simply be together without the demands of work or worry pressing close. "Caleb?" Clara's voice was soft in the darkness. "Hmm?" "Thank you for seeing past the desperate widow and her child to the people we actually are. For giving us a chance when you had every reason to protect yourself. For opening your heart even though it scared you." Caleb laced his fingers through hers, brought her hand to his lips. "Thank you for being brave enough to accept help. For trusting me with your daughter and your future. For teaching me that love doesn't always look like what we expect, but that doesn't make it less real or less precious." They sat in comfortable silence, the night settling around them with the familiar sounds of their ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the barn, the soft rustle of wind through grass. This was home now. Not just a place, but a feeling. Not just shelter, but belonging. And somewhere in that quiet darkness, two people who'd thought their chances at happiness were over discovered that sometimes endings are really beginnings in disguise, and sometimes the courage to accept help is the same courage that saves you, and sometimes a plea for shelter in a barn becomes the foundation for a love that transforms everything. Their story had started with desperation and survival, but it had grown into something neither of them had dared to hope for. A true partnership, a genuine love, and a family built not on passion or romance, but on respect, trust, and the daily choice to keep showing up for each other no matter what came. And as stars wheeled overhead and the future stretched out before them full of promise and possibility, Caleb Reed and Clara Hayes. Reed held each other close and knew with bone-deep certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be, exactly who they were meant to be with, living the life they'd both thought was lost forever, but had somehow found anyway. The end of their struggle, the beginning of their forever.